Alright, y'all. Welcome back. Hope it didn't scare you off that easily. Welcome to part two of the intro to the US or whatever it is. Last time we were setting the stage and refreshing ourselves on the events leading up to the discovery of America, but I don't think it'd be fair to just focus on the Europeans. We also have to take a look at the Americas. For instance, let's take a look at today's map of North America and South America. Let's go even further and put it into perspective. North America consists of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, but it also contains Central America with countries like Belize, Panama, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Guatemala. But we're also forgetting the Caribbeans, such as Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Trinidad y Tobago, which translates to Trinity and Tobacco, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Barbados, and yes, even smaller nations like Antigua and Barbuda, the ancient and the bearded, Dominica, Grenada, and Saint Lucia, Saint Vincent, and the Grenadine. If you think about it, each one of these nations that I just mentioned have such a rich and complex history that you can theoretically make a history class for every nation. For every nation, every country. We enlarge the map even further. We have the map of the United States. For U.S. history students, regardless of where we're at in its geography, they will have an inherent subconscious curiosity of the state they were born from. As a result, we can apply the same theory. Every state, regardless of size and age, is so rich in its history that each state can theoretically have a whole class dedicated to it. And that is really powerful. Moving on, we turn to the United States map of today, or as of 2026. Take in all the details. What do you see? What details can you remember? Then let's take it a bit further. How does the 1850 sound? Whoa. Looks like we're missing some states. But why? Look, Alaska is nowhere to be seen. Let's see if we can find any more changes as we journey back in time. Now we're in the year 1830, and states that we're so familiar suddenly aren't visible to us. Most of the states that we see now were originally territories, meaning that instead of them joining the country, they were just land claimed by the U.S. Even further, when we see the original 13 colonies or states, these maps are the maps we interpret based off of primary and secondary sources. Now, we have to take like a little mini history, right? We track history mainly by two categories. The first is known as primary sources and secondary sources. These types of sources are sources that are from a certain type of era. It can be from any era, but the source has to originate from that era. It could be the uniform worn by Army Rangers during World War II. It could be pictures and letters from a loved one or someone who is going through a significant event in their life. In short, think of the person. Think of it like the person being there, talking to, like that. That the person that you're talking to is, who's lived it. They have their own jacket. They have their own voice recording. They have their own letters and pictures to prove that they were there. That they were that they were part of that event. These sources usually have indicators for it to be considered as one. Take, for instance, this piece of parchment paper, located in Google and in the Google Arts and Culture, and in collaboration with History of San Jose. This primary source contains a glimpse of the past, including the type of material used to write, what type of material was written on, and the contents it indicates. This, of course, is the day in the life of the Pueblo San Jose. But how do we know without trying to interpret this with other pieces? Well, let's go back a few pages, and you're left with this page, titled A Year in the Life of the Spanish Colonial Pueblo, San Jose de Guadalupe, in 1809. This page explains all about primary sources. Essentially, they summarize the letters written by these pobladores, or the people who lived in this pueblo during that time. Now we go to the secondary sources. Secondary sources, to me, should be treated kind of like gossip, right? You weren't there, you heard some, but you're overhearing someone talk about what they lived through, right? Just bear with me, right? In this hypothetical situation, while primary source, is explaining their life story that they lived through, secondary source, is in the background hearing all this and uses this to tell others this story, kind of like a game of telephone, or in essence, gossip, right? As previously said, most of what we know about the maps of the United States are based off of these maps. For example, take a look at this one. Like, how do you even begin to understand what I'm looking at? Not only that, but over the course of this passion project, I'll try to show you some primary sources that attempt to give us some sort of clues or hints that should tell us about a certain time period is. Then we'll have someone talk about it with their interpretation. The powerful stuff that they don't normally teach you in history classes, minus the gatekeeping advanced classes like EP, history and all that, is that history is considered a critical thinking class. Yeah, you can, secondary saw gossiping about primary Paul's story. Ask him or her or them about specific details. Right? Scrutinize their story. Is secondary Saul accurate, or is it just BS? Where is Saul getting their info from? Use that beautiful mind and engage with the content. You promise me? Good, because now it's time to move on with this mini lesson. Even before the 13 colonies, we see many European countries settling territories. Heck, we even see multiple wars and battles being fought for territory. But again, we will cross that bridge when we get there. Until then, let's journey further into the past. Not just 1492. Because if we want to argue that the United States is a nation of immigrants, we have to go even further back. 1492 was the year that marked the modern era. 1492 was also a turning point during the Age of Discovery. But we also have to acknowledge something else. In the Americas, there's an era before the coming of the settlers. This was known as the pre-Columbian era, before contact with the Europeans. The Americas was vibrant and rich with tribal communities. If we journey to the southwestern part of North America, wherein lies Mexico, Central America, and it even seeps down to parts of South America, you can see the popular and most well-known tribes known as the Mayans, the Olmecs, the Tlaxcalans, and above all, the Aztecs. But to be honest, that is a bit inaccurate. The Aztecs were the group name of the tribes from Nahuatl descent, specifically the Nahuatl Mexica. Mexica. If you look at the spelling of Mexica, it looks eerily similar to the spelling of Mexico. And I will let your imagination figure out where the name Mexico came from. The popular story goes that the Aztecs primarily got their given name not by the Spanish conquistadors during the conquest, but by a random German scholar named Alexander von Humboldt, calling the tribe Azteques. There was earlier uses of it as well. According to IndigenousMexico.org, in an article written by Jonathan Rodriguez, it was believed that a mestizo noble, mestizo being a son of a Spaniard and a native, we'll talk about that when we get to California history, and named Fernando Alvarado de Sosmoc, an indigenous scholar, Ximalpin of Chalco ancestry, created the Crónica Mexicayotl. Or earlier uses of the word Aztec was led to believe that it was used as an original name before tribes splitting it off into their respective communities. It was said that the birthplace of the Nahua people, including the Mexicas, came from the sacred place known as Aztlan. And if you look at the name spelling, it has the beginning of AZ, similar to Aztecs. And the general consensus believed that the Aztec translates to the people of Aztlan. Branching out of the Mexicas, there were also an outstanding number of communities, including the Tlaxcalans, the Mixtecs, the Zapotecs, the Totonacs, and many others. We can see the Aztecs weren't just one group, but in fact were composed of different and various complex groups. The tribes of Mesoamerica dove into trade, built complex water systems, and developed complex infrastructure, including the Mayan pyramids of Yucatan, the Olmec head, and many more. Which is a far cry from this inferiority and primitive labels that they unjustly got. If you journey more into North America, we will see trade and nomadic tribes. In California alone, according to the North California Indian Development Council, there are about 109 tribes, with the State Native American Heritage Commission stating that tribes from the different areas of California also had different ways of life and different rituals. Some were nomadic, while others allied themselves and lived in a tight community. However, if you go into the different names, you kind of see some eradications. For example, if you look at pictures of maps of the tribes such as this, you'll see weird names. And when I say weird, I mean out of place. For example, in Central America, or Central California, excuse me, you'll have names like Matale, Lasik, Nogat, Wintun, Yana, Yahi, and Maidu, among others. Or when you get to Southern California, you'll have names such as the Gabrieleños or the Juaneños. And the obvious response is like, come on. They can't be named that, right? And you'd be right. If you open up the digital atlas of California Native Americans, you can see those names, but with parentheses. That can only mean one thing. The original names were replaced. The original name for Gabrieleño was known as the Tongva, and the Juaneños were known as the Achachamen. We have to be careful because, as previously stated, names of native tribes are constantly being renamed by others, and because of this, we can only assume there are a number of different tribes forgotten to time as their culture and way of life have been eradicated with minimal traces left behind. And again, this is just one state. According to the United States Congress, there are about 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States today, with about 227 being located in Alaska and the rest in about 48 of the United States. But just think about how many that aren't recognized. The largest reservation, according to Congress, is the Navajo Reservation. And the mother name is Diné. Diné. There's a little E. There's a little accent on the E. Translated to the people, which spans across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Other major tribes include the Sioux, consisting of Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. The Cherokee of North Carolina, and Ojibwe of the Great Lakes and Northern Plains. And to be frank, we're missing a vast amount of different tribes that I didn't even mention, which is such a different thing that words cannot describe, because with the amount of rhetoric being presented today, we have to take an effort and acknowledge that the land of the United States was already occupied before the Europeans. And also acknowledge that these tribes fought for their right to live on their turf. Just like you or me, if we were being threatened to be kicked out of our homes, right? We have a lot of time to discuss the intricacies and debate regarding the reasons why the United States set destructive policies and treatment of the native tribes. And trust me, we will get there. Eventually. Maybe. I don't know. Well, what I want out of this for you to think about is the dynamics that these tribes presented. And for your homework, if you want to do it, I want you to pick out a local tribe or a band of natives and just go over a brief history. It could be anything. It could be in your residential area. It could be your state, your city, your country, whatever they mean. Right? And just go over a brief history. Were they nomadic? Were they battle hardened? Did they trade? What was their life like? How are they living before contact? You know, as someone who's studying Latin American history, it overlaps California and U.S. history. One of the biggest things out of this story includes the mission system and the expedition in California. Now, this is an example of first contact, and if you can do this essentially in any state, because if you look hard enough, there are diaries among different first contacts, different tribes, and in different states. You can see this content also can challenge earlier viewpoints of this primitive narrative that we were talking about earlier. Take, for instance, this diary. This diary is from Spanish cartographer Miguel Costanzo. A cartographer is someone who created maps, right? And he was part of the Portola expedition, the first overland expedition of California. In this diary, he documents initial contact with the various tribes of California, saying, quote, from our camp, one could see on the top of a low hill an Indian village. The inhabitants warned us warned of our coming by their neighbors of San Alejo, sent sent two of their number to beg leave to come and visit me. We gave them to understand by signs that they should defer the visit until the following day, but forthwith they went back to their village, and in a short time all the inhabitants came to our camp. There must have been as many as 40 men, well built and good looking. The leader of the chief soon afterwards began his harangue with loud cries and awed grimaces. But without giving him to finish, we made presents to him and his people of some glass beads and sent them away. In the morning, they returned and remained quietly among us until our departure. Or take, for instance, from a random Genoese's diary on October 12th, 1492. The vessels were hove to, waiting for daylight, and on Friday they arrived at a small island of the Lucayos, called in the language of the Indians Guanahani. Presently they saw naked people. Many inhabitants of the island assembled. What follows is in the actual words of the admiral in his book of the first navigation and discovery of the Indies. He says, that we might form great friendship, for I knew that they were a people who could be more easily freed and converted to our holy faith by love than by force. Gave to some of them red caps and glass beads to put around their necks, as you can see a bunch of Spanish explorers kind of traded gold with glass beads, and this was to say that glass beads held more value than gold or silver, so that's why the Spanish theoretically, hypothetically, were able to get more gold that way by trading and bartering. To put around their necks, and many other things of little value, which gave them great pleasure, and made them so much our friends that it was a marvel to see. They afterwards came to the ship's boat where we were, swimming and bringing us parrots, cotton threads and skeins, darts, and many other things, and we exchanged them for other things that we gave them, such as glass beads and small bells. In fine, they took all and gave what they had with goodwill. It appeared to me to be a race of people very poor in everything. They go as naked as when their mothers wore them, and so do the women. Although I do not see more than one young girl, all I saw were youths, not more than 30 years of age. They are very well made, with very handsome bodies and very good countenances. Their hair is short and coarse, almost like the hairs of a horsetail. They wear their hairs brought down to the eyebrows, except a few locks behind which they wear long and never cut. They paint themselves black, and they are the color of the Canarians, neither black nor white. Some paint themselves white, others red, and others of what color they find. Some paint their faces, others the whole body. Some only round the eyes, others only on the nose. They neither care nor know anything of arms. For I showed them swords, and they took them by the blade and cut themselves through ignorance. They have no iron, their darts being wand without iron, some of them having a fish's tooth at the end, and others being pointed in various ways. They are all of the fairest stature and size, with good faces and well made. I pointed in various ways. They are all of fair stature and size, with good well made. I saw some with marks of wounds on their bodies, and I made signs to ask what it was, and they gave me to understand that people from other adjacent islands came with the intention of seeing them, and that they defended themselves. I believe, and still believe, that they come here from the mainland to them prisoners. They should be good servants and intelligent, for I observed that they quickly took in what was said to them, and I believe that they would easily be made Christians, as it appeared to me that they had no religion. I, our Lord being pleased, will take hence, at the time of my departure, 6 natives for your highnesses, that they may learn to speak. I saw no beast of any kind, except parrots, on this island. The above is in the words of the admiral. As you can see from these two different contexts, it not only describes a glimpse of how the natives lived, but it also describes initial impressions from these settlers. To challenge the primitive narrative, we can also talk about how perceptive they were. When the Spanish arrived in the Americas, Pope Alexander VI, the Pope at the time, pontificated a papal bull, which was a royal decree, right? He pontificates the papal bull known as Inter Cartera, which is Latin for among other things, in 1493, which allowed the Spanish to claim undiscovered lands. We'll talk about the doctrine of discovery on the next, hopefully in the next video, but it was in the name of the king in Christianity. In New Spain, Nueva España or Mexico, tribes fought for their land. Like, get this, the tribes fought for their land and actually went through the Spanish courts. Right? They went through litigation in the late 1500s. Right? And they fought for entitlement of their land because they're like, hey, they're not listening to us. So the only way we will be able to kind of like fight this is if we go to the court. Right? And initial arguments was ancestral rights. We were here first. We cultivated the land. Our ancestors were right here, so we deserve the entitlement of land. And of course, the Spanish was all like, no, because the villages were going under a transformation. Because of that, they were no longer entitled to their land. Right? So now because of this, Spanish were accused of changing the indigenous, the native Mexican, of manipulating their memory, right? And the natives, because of this, developed what was known as Christian thinking. They believed, hey, like, if we can't fight for our ancestral rights, that we need to join them so that we could get that rights back, right? It's one of those like, hey, I gotta, in order to beat them, we gotta join them, type beat, right? In 1538, Pope Paul III pontificates Sublimis Deus. Well, technically it was 1537, but he pontificates Sublimis Deus, which is Latin for the sublime God, which disallowed slavery of natives. I can't make this up, right? He said that, hey, in order for them to basically take in the word of God, you cannot deprive of the natives of their liberties, right? You can't force them into slavery. You can't force them to understand the word of God, right? Not only that, he actually claimed that not only were the Indians able to receive the word of God, but they wish to receive it. His words, not mine. I'm just relaying that information. Right? In California, according to native historian Brooke S. R. Cush, there was a chance that the native California tried to manipulate the encomienda system by purposely converting to Catholicism. This includes participating in Catholic ceremonies to strengthen their spiritual power and ritual knowledge, or to even elevate their status. We'll talk about more about the Californios. We can see this in the diary of Father Junipero Serra, who is the father of the California mission system, in a book titled Writings of Junipero Serra. While he was in Mission Carmel, Mission Basilica San Carlos de Borromeo. There you go. He wrote a letter describing the interaction between a priest and a native, and this is what it said. After that, the father asked him, why is it that when we first came to these parts and had set up 2 crosses near Monterey, on our return here, we found that the Gentiles, the non-believers, had hung on the arm strings of sardines and pieces of deer meat, and at the foot of the cross had shot many broken arrows. He answered, the native answered, they had done so, that the cross, Porpor was the name they gave it, might not be angry with them. And to explain why they were afraid, he said that the sorcerers and priests, because the tribes had their own priests, they had their own ritual, they had their own ritual ceremonies and back there. So, it proves that these natives, even though they're 2 different time periods, they had religion, they had their own theology. Right? But continuing, sorcerers and priests, dancers who roam through the night saw the cross each night, going up high in the heavens, not of dark material as wood is, but resplendent with light, and beautiful to behold. And for that reason, they regarded it with great respect, and made presents to it of all they had. Right? Not only that, he further states that from that time on, they conceived a great respect for the cross as something very good, and thought highly of our people. And in this way, they were considerably influenced also by the fact that seeing our people coming through the fields, they noticed a great flock of birds of various and beautifully blended colors, such as they had never before seen. The birds swooped out of the heavens and took up their position in the air just ahead of them, singing the while, just as if they came to greet and welcome to this country their newly arrived guest. With that being said, right, we seen these two impressions. We see the first interaction. We see kind of like this evidence supporting this argument that this native historian is, right? But we have to acknowledge that this is only through one perspective. We have yet to talk about the native side, which unfortunately is rare because the systems that were in place systematically remove the natives from their home, out of their homeland, right? There was instances where the Spanish were burning books, you know, right? As an example, right? According to YouTuber Religion for Breakfast, he says, we need to realize that all of this information is being filtered through a European and Christian lens. But hope is not lost, right? Recall the Crónica Mexicayotl, right? As previously stated, it was created by a mestizo son and indigenous scholar, right? It was in the word of the Nahua. It was in the Nahua language, right? It is the right. This was the complete history of the Mexica Empire or the Aztec Empire, written in Nahua language sometime in the 1600s, and was translated in 1949 by a scholar named Adrian Leon. So he translates it from the Nahua language to the Spanish language, right? But that's the problem, right? It was only in Spanish, so you would have to learn Spanish in order to understand the Aztec Codex, right? It wasn't until 1997 where it was later translated in a two volume book known as the Codex Chimalpain, named after Chimalpa, one of the indigenous scholar that archived this. Right, this codex is considered to be one of the strongest indigenous histories ever written because they use information only pertinent to the Mexica Empire, right? They use their so with their knowledge, right, of the Aztec Empire. Fernando, the author of it, supposedly, allegedly, I'm pretty sure it is, right, is the grandson of Moctezuma II, the last ruler of the Aztec Empire before being conquered by Hernan Cortez. Right? Or how about the surviving four Mayan codices, including the Maya Codex of Mexico, which can be traced back to pre-Columbian time, right? 900 years before the arrival of the Spanish settlers, right? And get this codex, the Maya Codex of Mexico, right? It was just announced in 2016 that this was authentic. And in it, which kind of like baffles my mind, it predicted the movement of Venus. You see, dude, that's some powerful stuff. Right? Right. Of course, I didn't really talk about where we talked about the early ancestors to certain tribes, but it does give a glimpse into, hey, these guys have rich histories. These guys' histories are continuously being destroyed to this day. And we have to acknowledge that, hey, even though there's Americans, Canadians, Mexicans, Ecuadorians, Salvadorians, Guatemalans, and all that good stuff, like, right, we have to acknowledge that these countries are countries made of immigrants, because before these countries, there was already people. I'm very thankful that you sat through this and kind of like hear me talk about these different tribes. And I know that I didn't really talk about these tribes in great detail. And honestly, like, there's a lot to go on. There's a lot of research that needs to be involved. And one of these days, we will talk about that. But anyways, we now finished the brief introduction to the United States, and we still haven't even seen the 13 colonies. We still haven't seen kind of like these grand sails across the Atlantic. Right, next time I cannot guarantee that we'll still get into it, and I don't know if we ever will at this rate. But the chess pieces are starting to line up. They're starting to move. And we'll finally start this complicated tale. Until then, this is history. This is our history. And that's all they wrote.